If you pass through raging waters, in the sea you shall not drown. If you walk amid the burning flames, you shall not be harmed. If you stand before the power of hell and death is at your side, know that God is with you through it all.
Hello, viewers. A very special greeting to you, or wherever you are watching us from. America has been in the news lately following the killing of George Floyd. So today we are having a discussion on racism in America. And our resource person is a man who I think qualified for this particular discussion, because for close to 30 years he was a police officer, and currently he is the office director of the African American Catholic Ministry in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. Deacon Royce, you are welcome.
Oh, it's always good to be here. As I say, Madase P, thank you for allowing me to be here.
It's good to still remember your tree.
Yes. I've got a little bit. I just have to use it every once in a while.
Okay, that's good. All right. Deacon Royce, for those of us outside America, help us to understand the issues of racism in America by giving us a general overview.
Okay, if I'll start with a general overview. One of the things in my initial visits to Ghana, we went to the castle there, and where the transatlantic slave trade began, and it was in 1609 as those slaves were brought to the shores of America, and racism began then. That in America, that America was formed, and almost 200 years later in 1776, and as they formed this new country, in its legislative branch, it stated that people of color, black folk, were less than human, right? Okay. And then we had what we call chattel slavery, not indentured servants, but chattel slavery, where they are mistreated, abused to work a land, agriculture, primarily in building roads, construction. And it began, it's part of our 401-year history that we're still fighting now.
Okay. All right. That is very, very good. That is for us to appreciate the type of discussion we are coming to have this particular day. Now, as an African American, have you had a personal experience of racism?
In my view and my family's view and all of my relatives here, let me start with my parents. My parents, starting on my mother's side, my parents and grandfather, they were what we call sharecroppers. Okay. They were descendants of slaves who then began to work the land that was owned by white people. Okay. My grandmother my grandmother had 18 children, right? And those children were raised in an environment where they were overseen by white people, and they were working a land that they were making very little money, right? They could live on the land, but the proceeds of that land went to the owner of the land. Okay. And it's from that, and even in my experience now, and I am now 63 years old, it has been a part of my life in so many varied ways, as opposed to my oldest son, 40. It wasn't until recently that he expressed that he had a racist encounter. Okay. But for me, it's been a part of my life since my birth. So it is a part of life here in America.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Now, for close to 30 years, you were a police officer.
Yes.
How will you describe the police force during your time and the police force today as far as issues of racism are concerned?
In 1979, 1980, the state of Ohio was under a consent decree by what we say our federal government.
Okay.
The consent decree said to municipalities, cities, towns, that they had to hire blacks and women. And that's 1979 and 1980. Yeah. That means there was concerted effort by those in power not to hire black people, not to have women for law enforcement. Yet in the city, black folk made up 50% of the city population. So we had and yet they had no way to enforce the laws amongst their own people. Okay. So that's how my career began. It ended from the 1979. I retired in 2006. There was lots of changes.
Okay.
But within the police department, we recognize that there are good policemen and there are bad policemen, yeah. Right?
Yeah.
If they're bad when they come on, they're going to be bad as a police officer. Yeah. And then you have very few who begin to police in cities and they've never seen or never been around people of color. They've never seen poverty in the way that it is in some of our urban core, and they don't know how to handle it. So they feel that's a threat to them. And then they become what I would call bad police officers as well.
Okay. All right. Now, you are now working in the church now as a deacon. And when I was going through the mission of the African American Catholic Ministry, I found this, that the group is the office is inspired by the indwelling of the Holy Spirit in all people. Yeah. Facilitate the affirmation, acceptance, and inclusion of the people of African heritage into the mission and life of the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. Right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, coming from this background and what is happening now in America, how does that make you feel?
You know that I know that in my office, yeah, that I minister to all of God's people, no matter what color they are, right? Yeah. But because of the background in America where racism has been a part, which means it's also been a part of the church, that we have to have someone in a position to advocate what's best for people of color. That even though we're all one human race, our systems have not been accountable to the needs of Black people. That includes Africans who then come and become this part of this American way. That my office advocates on their behalf, and we need a voice in that position, since there are none other than I.
Okay, all right. The killing of George and the reaction, the protest all over. Do you see that as leading to a change of systems? To be, a one-off thing, it will go off and the society will go back to normal ways?
So the killing of George Floyd was a one incident. I mean, that's just one incident in our lives. As tragic as it is, he was murdered by a police officer who didn't care for human life. But George Floyd is just one of those incidents throughout the history of America and its racist past that not only Black folk, but people of every color, every race, every language, every nation are protesting in our streets, around this country. But not only in this country, around the world, people have responded to this. And that if this can happen in America, this can happen anywhere, right? Yeah. When we look and for those folk who were not born in America, sometimes they have this romanticized idea that America is this place of the home, the free and the brave. Yet America has had more problems than the whole continent of Africa, and Africa is older than America. America is only 240 years old. See, Africa's been around since the existence of humanity. Yeah. So, and yet America has its own niche in society of being a race, having this racist past, and it continues, and people are responding to all of those issues as opposed to just to George Floyd.
Okay. Now, how can this problem be, dealt with? How can a problem be solved from where you are?
It has to be solved. One, we have to be intentional, right? Meaning that we have the intent to change the system that keeps people in poverty. Poverty is really at the essence of racism, right? When people don't have, and when people hoard what they have, it makes an unprivileged society. So we have to have the intent to change the system. And changing the system is a lifelong process. It's not going to happen immediately. It's similar. I'll use, there was a time in the Catholic Church here in this diocese, this archdiocese, where Black men could not become priests, right?
Wow.
The bishop would not allow them to become priests. It wasn't until 1956 in a diocese that began over 200 years ago that the first African-American was ordained a priest.
Okay.
We thank God, just that aside, over the last 3 years, we've had 2 Ugandans and 1 Nigerian ordained in this diocese. We've had the pleasure of and great gift of various Ghanaian priests who study here and minister to us. One in your diocese, Father Dominic, my buddy, my friend, right? So we've engaged in that. But that has not always been the opportunity in the Catholic Church for Black people to become religious, whether it be a sister or a brother or a priest or a deacon, right? But we have to be intentional, and we have to wait on God. That we say we want to get something done, but if God's not in it, then we're most likely going to mess it up. So when I say the indwelling of God's Spirit is part of our mission, we have to listen to the voice of God and then act. And we know that things are changing, but things are not going to change for good until years, and hopefully my children and my children's children will see the change.
Okay. So you mentioned being intentional, and then also changing the system, and also waiting on God. Now, for you as African Americans, while waiting for this change to happen, what should be your response to the system?
That as much as we want to fight against the system, and we have to fight against the system, we also know we live with the system, right? That at the same point in time, this system has afforded us some freedoms that it should apply to across the board to everybody, but not everybody has access, right? So at the same time, there are the negatives of the system. There are some positive things about being in America, and yet we can't be satisfied by change in little steps. We need some radical change, and radical change meaning, again, that we have to be intentional. We also have to be faithful. We also, that the church stands on justice. One of the pillars of the church is justice. So if we're not doing justice, then we're not doing God's work.
Okay. That's good. At least if you're not standing on justice, then you're not doing God's work. Now let's still stay in the church. Cardinal Texan recently had a cause to make a comment that this idea of racism in America is affecting the Africans who come over to study, because they don't feel work. As a result of that, some of them are leaving the church when they finish their studies and they come home. What should the church do?
For 3 years in a row, from 2015, 16, 17, my office, the African American Ministries office, and the mission office had a symposium for Africans in our diocese. We had Eritreans, Kenyans, Nigerians, Ghanaians, Cameroonians, and a couple of more that I haven't named. And we met and we discussed, right? And one of the things that across the board, the parents of our African children who are now in this archdiocese, they had a concern that their children wanted to be more American than they wanted to be Ghanaian, right? Or Cameroonian or Kenyan. That somehow coming to America, they wanted to walk away from all of that great culture that is in them. And their parents recognized it and asked us, how can we assist them, right? With helping their children embrace both who they are as African and also this new American culture. Right. One of the challenges, though, is when the church, and there's not an African Catholic church in our diocese. There are Ghanaians who go to St. Benedict de Moor, which is operated. The pastor is Father Francis Tando, who is a Spiritan priest, right? And there are other African priests who assist him. There was Joshua Odosafo That was Benjamin, Father Benjamin has assisted, but there's not an African Catholic parish in this archdiocese.
Okay.
So what they are drawn to, there are some Protestant Ghanaian ministers who are here. Not only do they provide culture, but they provide language, and some of them are going to the Pentecostal movement and those kinds of things. And we have to do a better job of supporting Ghanaian African families and ministering to their whole family so their children can retain who they are.
Okay. Since you mentioned culture, yesterday, you realize that the Democrats, during the memorial they had, they were using the kente cloth. Yeah. What does the kente cloth signify for you African Americans?
I was surprised that the Democrats had it on, but those Democrats who were wearing it would not have worn it had not someone black and had experience of the value of kente, right? Okay. The connection to our Africanness, also to our blackness, right? In my own diocese, in my own parish, which is the Church of the Resurrection in Cincinnati, we are a predominantly African American parish.
Okay.
The parish was built by German Americans, so all of the art is Euro-American centric, right? There's white people on the stained glass windows, and the corpus on the cross is white in nature. So one of the ways, rather than trying to change that art, we embrace the art that is there, but we introduce kente cloth as part of our altar aprons, our altar cloth on the altar. We have it sewn in all of our vestments, right? Okay. It's a connection that not only are we Black and American, but we, especially since we are also a sister church to our Ghanaian friends, that we're connected to our Africanness. And it wasn't until I didn't know what that meant. And I was ministering to the various African people, and they said, you just simply have to go home. And I didn't know what they meant. Yeah. But when I got to Ghana, I understood what they meant. There's a spirituality of being African, right? And it's effusive in the people. They may not have much, but they know God, right? And it's a part of their everyday existence. And that's what we use. So the kente cloth, the various African art that we have in my parish helps us understand that our origins, who we are, is really from the African continent.
Oh, okay. Well, we can't end this conversation without talking about the coronavirus pandemic.
Yes.
How has the virus impacted on your ministry?
It has impacted my ministry greatly. From the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, we have the privilege of working from home. I'm at home now, sitting in my living room, watching you on this computer, and I've been doing that since March. So from March 18th until today, I have not been to the Chancery or to the Pastoral Center because everything I have, I can access from my computer. So, and I did leave the house today. I went to the seminary today to talk to the rector of the seminary to see how we're going to change training formation for seminarians who are going through the seminary in light of the pandemic as well as in light of racism. Okay. But here in America, that even though we have access to water that we take for granted, right? The pandemic here has struck us very hard. Yeah. And it has impacted African Americans more than anybody else. Right. And that's part of the systemic racism that we talk about, that the health inequities that we have in the United States. We have Black folk who don't have access to health care in this great United States. That just shouldn't happen. Yeah. But because of those, that over a period of time, we develop illnesses that white folk don't, because of not having quality health care. And you know something about that as well. Okay.
All right, Deacon Royce, your final message.
Okay.
Yeah.
My final message. I really want to thank you. I want to thank the Archbishop John Bonaventure Kofi and the people of the Diocese of Sekondi Takoradi that you have changed my life, right? And in the midst of pandemic, in the midst of storms and trials, God says, I have not abandoned you. I have not orphaned. And I won't leave you orphaned. That if we're open to the movement of God in the midst of all of this crisis, God will see us through, right? God asked us what is our desire? Our desire is to know God more than anything else, and God will not forsake us. So God has us on his side.
Okay. All right, Deacon Royce. It's been wonderful having this conversation with you. You do it again.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Enjoy the rest
All right,
of
I
the
look forward to it.
Yeah.
Hey, send me the link. Thank you.
All right. Greetings to the family.
All right, and greetings to your family and friends. I appreciate it.
All right.
Blessings.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
See you. Bye.